Hello and welcome to this week's Politics Today. And in this programme we shall be discussing the political crisis that is engulfing the BBC after they edited a speech made by President Donald Trump on the 6th of January 2021, which has now proved to be false and inaccurate and also dangerous. And so we'll be reflecting on, is this the beginning of the end of the BBC? And in this programme today, I'm joined by Robert Harris from the Voice for Justice UK, together with Captain David Hews from Prayer for Parliament UK. I'll start off with you, Robert. It's always good to have you on the programme, and I love the diligence and the research and the insight you put into this programme, and of course the excellent work that you do in defending our Christian freedoms where it matters most in Parliament. Can you give us an important update on the ministry that is Voice for Justice UK?
It's nice to be back on your programme, Simon. Thanks for having me. Well, Voice for Justice continues to do many things on many fronts, but I just want to highlight one thing. Many of the viewers of this programme will know that there's a bill going through Parliament, one of the most concerning, destructive pieces of legislation arguably ever to go through Parliament, which is known as the Assisted Dying Bill. We prefer to call it assisted suicide. And it's currently in the House of Lords. We are urging our subscribers, and indeed people watching this programme are free also to contact members of the House of Lords. On our website, we have an amazing amount of resources telling people what the concerns are, what the dangers are of legislating for this thing. And it's effectively putting everyone at risk, not just older people. Everyone who enters a hospital will be potentially at risk. You have to read the literature to find out why. This is not just slogans. So the parliamentary committees, there's two of them that are scrutinising the bill as we speak. There was an expert, medical expert, who was actually pro-assisted suicide. He said the other day that there will be mistakes made if this becomes law. So this is interesting. There's an admission that mistakes will be made. This is a very, very dangerous piece of legislation, as I said earlier. And I urge people, if you really want to be concerned about yourself and your loved ones, do look into this and contact a member of Parliament and express your concerns.
Well done, very good. And David, great to have you back on the programme, and the important work that you and the team do with Prayer for Parliament UK, going into Westminster and praying. And I know that you've got a significant meeting coming up with MP Danny Kruger, who has defected to the Conservative Party and is now on Reform, and that opens up the door for so many evangelical Bible-believing Christians to be part of this Reform Party, which could then form our next government. So give us an update on the vital prayers being done in what is the most hostile government and Parliament towards Christians, probably in the history of Parliament.
We've focused more now on praying for the House of Lords because of the assisted suicide bill going through. They need all the prayers that they can get. We've slightly concentrated more on the Lords than the Commons. Obviously the Commons need to have prayer all the time, but they've made such a mess of everything that it's really important that the Lords pick up and actually do what they're there to do. Use wisdom, their discernment, and reverse what's been coming up from the other house. We're praying a lot for all the people in the House of Commons and the House of Lords. The Palace of Westminster, we're getting such a lot of good vibes from all the police, the security people, and the staff there. We're very much in favour. It's amazing. God has opened doors that need to be opened, and I hope He's shutting ones that need to be shut. But no, we've actually got more people coming in with our meetings than before. We're averaging about 11 or 12 a week now.
Excellent. And obviously we're talking about the BBC, which is the main kind of political story of this week, Robert. So what do you make of this massive scandal that is currently engulfing the BBC right now? As the Daily Telegraph reports, the BBC has been forced to apologise for the error of judgment that saw Donald Trump's speech on the 6th of January 2021 edited misleadingly, as revealed by the Daily Telegraph in an episode of Panorama in October 2024, and that was to try and influence the US presidential elections that occurred last year.
I find it difficult to believe that it was just an error.
Yeah.
I mean, two pieces of footage drawing on Donald Trump's speech on January the 6th, 2021 were put together, and they were at different ends of the speech, it was clearly intended to show a certain narrative that he said, which he didn't say. They're admitting to that. So I don't understand how they can call it an error of judgment. What is interesting is that the external advisor, who was a member of the editorial and standards committee to the BBC, Michael Prescott, I think his name is, he wrote his concerns in what is now called a memo, and highlighted this to the BBC board. And the question is, well, which members of the board were privy to this memo? And that raises the question, well, the Director General has given in his resignation. What did he know? Did he pay attention to this if he did know about it? But I mean, this is not an isolated incident. It happens to be an incident that exposes some really significant breach of the code. And of course, it concerns the most powerful man in the world, the President of the United States. And there's clearly, an admission of wrongdoing in all but name. They've apologised, and we still haven't heard the full statement from the BBC, which is, going to happen before Friday at 5 p.m., which is the deadline that Trump's lawyers have set for a full retraction, public retraction of this wrongdoing, and also a payout of some money. So we wait to see what happens there. But the thing is, this is not an isolated incident. There are many militant ideologies circulating in the world today, identity politics, Islamist ideologies, and so on and so forth, which the BBC have incorporated into their narratives. And it seems to me the BBC has really become, in the broadest sense of the term, radicalised on a number of ideological positions dealing with different subjects. So this is not an isolated incident. Absolutely. And it's just something that has come to the attention of the world, but just a symptom of a culture of ultra left-wing militancy, I think, at the BBC. I mean, who would have imagined that we could say that about the BBC, 30, 40 years ago?
Yeah, and it's also important, I think,
the gap between the two splice bits was 1 hour. I mean, that's a big chunk.
Indeed.
Oh, absolutely. So, I mean, talking about the BBC, I mean, we have to acknowledge that the BBC did an incredible job during the Second World War, was the voice of hope and freedom. Nations that were occupied by the Nazis would listen to the BBC radio broadcast for information, and that kept their spirits alive. But sadly, the BBC is nothing but a globalist corporation looking after globalist interests and doesn't actually care about truth anymore, as we're seeing that the BBC could be sued by President Trump for $1 billion. I want to read out this statement.
I just say, when I was in the Navy back in the 60s and 70s, we used to listen to the BBC World Service. And I mean, it was the creme de la creme for the BBC.
No, it's still pretty good, the BBC World Service. It's their TV news and their TV broadcasting that I think is the biggest problem. But I want to read out this quote by one of President Trump's lawyers regarding the BBC, and just give me your thoughts on it. So this is actually quoted in our mainstream media, and this is the statement made by one of President Trump's lawyers in accusing the BBC of doctoring and editing what he actually said on January the 6th, 2021. He said this. He said, the BBC has defamed President Trump by intentionally and deceitfully editing its documentary in order to try and interfere in the president's election for 2024. President Trump will continue to hold accountable those who traffic in lies, deception, and fake news. I mean, there we go. I mean, he's saying this very, very loud and clear. Essentially, what the BBC is doing is fake news, but they try to portray him as the main instigator in inciting the violence and the demonstrations we saw on the storming of the Capitol building on the 6th of January 2021, and trying to blame him for that. President Trump could have got impeached for that, could have been arrested for that, and it's this evidence of doctrinating what he said for political purposes. This is beyond fake news, isn't it?
Definitely. We've been, even when back in the early election in the 2016 or whatever it was, we were interceding and praying for President Trump and for the whole election situation. We could see the problems, and we really have been praying for the exposure of the media and the BBC and you know, there are others, it's not just the BBC, who were manipulating what was going on. And it's good to see that something is coming out. We've been praying an awful lot in Parliament that prayer, whatever's hidden in darkness will be brought into the light. And we do that over Parliament as well as over the media, and we're seeing the results. A lot of stuff's coming out of the skeletons are coming out of the cupboard, and it's thanks to prayer. Prayer is so powerful. I mean, God says that the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but spiritual, for pulling down strongholds, and we're pulling down strongholds everywhere.
Absolutely, it's a great story of David and Goliath, and we see that this giant that is the BBC looks like it's coming crashing down. Robert, give us your thoughts on the impression of what the BBC has done by showing a Panorama documentary on October the 6th, 2021, according to the Telegraph, that showed that President Trump was telling his supporters that he was going to walk to the Capitol building with them to fight like hell, when in fact he said he would walk with them peacefully and patriotically, make your voices heard. Share how the BBC's false and dangerous reporting has helped to demonise President Trump, particularly what happened in the storming of the Capitol building, which he has then blamed for the disturbance and the violence that we saw on that day.
Well, let's just remind ourselves that in the charter of the BBC, the Royal Charter, one of the many things it says, which is perhaps the most important thing, is that the BBC as a public broadcaster, service broadcaster, needs to report news impartially. Well, what can you say about that? They clearly, it's not that they haven't been impartial, they have been conspicuously, not just political, but I mean, there's no journalism there. You can't even use the word journalism. I mean, this is something that could be done by someone with strong political views, an amateur in his attic doing a YouTube video, you know, someone who's just starting out in life at 17. You know, it's ridiculous. I mean, the BBC has really, I won't say lost their integrity, I think they're being destroyed from within. You know, only a few days ago, there was a public row between Boris Johnson and Nick Robinson, the Today programme journalist, and Nick Robinson was suggesting that Boris Johnson was trying to, like other people, destroy the BBC because of the criticisms levelled at the BBC. I just think they're destroying themselves from within. They don't need anyone else to criticise them. I think, look, a lot of us would say, I'm one of them, that the BBC is a very left-wing organisation, and it doesn't actually hide it. This is the thing. If we had a situation where they were trying to put, you know, if they were trying to establish a veneer of impartiality, and maybe if they were getting it right a lot of the time, we would say, well, they're not perfect, but they're trying. They're not even trying. Their hostility towards people with traditional family values, people who don't buy into identity politics are viewed with hostility, and they don't even try to hide it. So none of this surprises me. It's just something that has come to the surface because of the embarrassment that they can't even hide now because of this leaked memo. Remember, let's remind ourselves, it was the Daily Telegraph that unearthed this memo. Otherwise, we would hear nothing of it.
No, absolutely. But I mean, if we look at the BBC's news coverage on, for example, President Trump during his first term, I don't think there was a day where the BBC didn't demonise President Trump during his first term. Demonising those who support Brexit, demonising those who are of conservative beliefs and also Christians as well, marginalising Christian voices, promoting kind of radical Islam, promoting sympathy for the mass illegal migration into the country. And of course, its coverage on Israel is beyond horrific. I mean, this is where I think the BBC has now got itself into trouble, because if, according to Genesis chapter 12, 1-3, I will bless those who bless you and I will curse those who curse you, the BBC has literally been cursing Israel ever since October the 7th. The lies, the misinformation, you only have to read and look at the Trevor Aston report on the BBC to know the scale of this problem. Having engaged with the BBC, having put people to interview in the BBC, my own understanding of the BBC is it's institutionally biased from within, from the bottom all the way up to the top. Young journalists come in fresh after university, are brainwashed into the kind of BBC thinking and mentality. And this is why the BBC think they've done nothing wrong. They still think that they are the most impartial, the most trusted media corporation in the world. So they're deluded themselves. But David, give us your thoughts on how it's really President Trump with this threat to sue the BBC for $1 billion US. If they don't, apologise, they don't give him sufficient, money to say, look, an apology, then President Trump could sue, and BBC haven't got a leg to stand on, have they? And the other aspect to this one is that to lose $1 billion US of our taxes that are going into the BBC will have a profound impact on the BBC, won't it?
Totally. It needs a big wake-up call to the BBC, and I think this is it. Trump has been actually tidying up a lot of the media, particularly in the States. He's been suing a lot of other areas, newspapers in New York and around and radio, and they've actually been agreeing before getting to court. And I think probably the BBC will make an agreement before getting to court. But they need this for a big wake-up call because they're so arrogant and full of pride. I mean, that's a big sin. God says pride is one of the worst sins. And the BBC is full of it. They're in the broadcasting house. There's a plaque where the BBC is, it was founded on Christian situation.
Principles,
and
absolutely.
People in the BBC are so left-wing and woke, they want to get rid of that plaque. I mean, the whole thing is so institutionally bad. And for our money to go being poured into it, something's got to shake the whole thing and literally pull the building down, metaphorically.
Absolutely. I mean, the BBC's charter is up for renewal as well. So there's a lot of discussion, particularly by Lisa Nandy, the Minister for Culture and Sport, about wanting to reform the BBC and the licence fee. But I mean, the differences between the BBC and ITV or Sky is that we fund it. The British taxpayer fund this. So, for example, shouldn't we have a say in the fact that the BBC has now been proved that it lies, it manipulates, it tells false narratives, and it has a deliberate political agenda to support the globalist ambitions, and part of that is to demonise President Trump. So share with us how, for example, this is a battle that the BBC can't win, and would this then lead to massive overall change in the BBC, or are we looking at the last days of the BBC as our national broadcaster?
Well, there's been huge amounts of debate in recent years about how the BBC operates with the licence fee and whether it's fit for purpose. I think it would appear to be increasingly inevitable that they change the operating system from that of the licence fee to a subscription operation, much like Netflix, for example. The question is when. I'm not sure whether this current government has an appetite maybe to make that change. But if at the next election, which is any time before 2029, happens, then there's a change of government, and if, as current polls suggest, that Reform wins the election, I think it's inevitable that they would seek to change that through the legal process. I think a lot of the older generation understandably still trust the BBC because they've grown up with it. We've all grown up with it, but many of us will also be getting our news content from other alternative reliable sources online. And I do think that the mainstream media more broadly, not just the BBC, their days are numbered. There's absolutely no question of that, because there's huge competition coming from online sources. And of course, it's a judgment call to decide which sources are going to be reliable, which sources are not worth looking at. But the mainstream media is now up against huge competition. And actually, it's interesting, the White House press corps now includes people under the current Trump administration who are online news providers. They've got no journalistic background, but they have to apply. Their qualifications need to be assessed. But what that's doing is it's bringing in a wider range of diverse voices, not just the traditional journalists whom we've heard from over and over again. And don't get me wrong, many journalists have done a fantastic job exposing moral wrongdoing. We admit that. But I think their days are numbered. The current form of journalism is now finding new horizons, and I think the traditional, way of doing journalism is, I think its days are numbered.
Like this program. Anyway, that's for another show. So I need you guys to all keep us on air anyway. So we adore our viewers, we love our viewers, and without your support, we wouldn't be there. So please don't give up on us anytime soon. David, I just want to bring you in because what comes to mind, particularly as we're discussing the BBC, particularly with the Director General of the BBC, Tim Davie, who has had to resign. I think his point, as I think God gave him a choice, was when the BBC broadcasted Glastonbury and showed the Glastonbury, the biggest music festival in the world. And we had the likes of Bob Vylan being on stage, chanting death, death to the IDF, which was foul. It was disgusting. The BBC didn't act on it. They did not stop that broadcast live as it was going on BBC iPlayer. They kept it up on BBC iPlayer for 6 hours. And isn't this a kind of a sense of where, as you have to be the Director General of the BBC, you need a moral compass. You need to know that this is morally wrong and this is abhorrent, and this is effectively having a musician chant chants of genocide towards the Israeli people and the Jewish people, and anyone Jewish who saw that would have been absolutely horrified. Isn't this a classic example of how these small things big things have happened and they haven't been dealt with properly? So is it no wonder that he's had to resign?
The leadership is absolutely, they got it wrong. They aren't getting on top of the thing. I don't know whether they were leading or not leading, but when they were sacked, or when they resigned, I was horrified as well, where Deborah said, oh yeah, it's a mistake, but also said, we are still trusted by everybody. Bias does not exist. I ask anybody in the streets about the BBC, everybody I know knows it's biased. The only people who seem to not know it's biased are the people at the BBC. And the more that things are exposed, the better, because we just got to keep praying for a complete change. There was a change in the past of newspapers stopping and everything's now online. I think the BBC is ready for a big change to the new whatever replaces it.
Absolutely. So I just want to quote something from Con Coughlin, who's the security editor of the Daily Telegraph. He's an excellent journalist. So he writes under this headline, "The BBC is wrecking Britain's reputation abroad and not enhancing it." So he says the corporation is currently not the most trusted news brand. Tim Davie, he writes, far from confirming the corporation's status as a trusted news brand, the constant controversies over its failure to provide properly informed coverage of key global events has inevitably raised questions about its impartiality both home and abroad. Just share with us though the damage it does by particularly in its support for calling Hamas terrorists or Hezbollah terrorists members of a group and not even classifying them as terrorists, downgrading the horrible impact of October the 7th, the demonization of Israel, and actually empowering the enemies of Israel and the enemies of West against us and being a propaganda mouthpiece for them.
I think Hamas and other militant terrorist groups would be very
You can call them terrorists. You can
yes,
call them terrorists.
they would be very, very happy with the BBC. In fact, just like Hamas praised the British government recently, I think they're very happy, and that tells you something is very, very wrong. Just think of this. They refuse to call Hamas terrorists, they call them militants, and they say, well, we need to be impartial. We say that the British government calls them that, or the European Union calls them that. Let's make a comparison very briefly. The Nazis in World War II, if they refer to the Nazis now, do they say the Nazi genocide according to the Nuremberg trials, according to the judgment at Nuremberg? They don't say that. We all know it's a genocide. We all know the Nazis were evil. You don't have to refer to a source as if it's an authority to make you impartial. Why do they do this with Hamas and say that they are not terrorists because that's an opinion? We want to be impartial. I think it's absolutely conspicuously obvious that they are biased. Someone has to be pretty stupid not to see that. Sorry to be so blunt.
Absolutely. Within 2 minutes left, let's bring into kind of the spiritual dynamics of all of this. It would seem that the BBC has come against the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, by spreading lies about Israel, by demonizing Israel and the Jewish people, for actually inflaming Jew hatred around the world and in this country because of their coverage on Israel, has inflamed Islamic opinion in this country that has led to terrorist attacks against the Jewish people, has led to demonization of the Jewish people in this country. So share with us how this giant is in real danger of coming crashing down, just as David threw that sling at Goliath.
You mentioned the Genesis 3,
Genesis 12,
12 verse 3, which basically, about curse and blessings. We've been praying that over not only the media, but also the government, and we've seen big things changing every time. Also, just this last week, the last Foreign Secretary, he cut off from basically Israel, and he's seeing the fall now. I mean, even he's being dragged before Commons to be accountable. People have to be accountable, and that God is opening up things that need to be opened up and exposed. And the more the better, as long as we keep praying over it. And
very quickly, in 2 sentences, is this the beginning of the end of the BBC, Robert?
I think so. I'd like to think so.
Very good. So David and Robert, thank you so much for being my guest on this week's Politics Day. You've done an absolute excellent job. So I want to thank you for watching this week's Politics Today. Journalism is supposed to be the guardians of democracy. They are there to scrutinise government policy in order to protect us from a government moving into authoritarianism. But sadly, we've seen that the BBC has had its own agenda. It has demonised President Donald Trump because he's an anti-globalist. We've seen that the BBC has attacked those who support Brexit, attacked those who stand for Christian values, but it's also incredibly demonised Israel and the Jewish people. So therefore, our national broadcaster has to be extremely careful, because not only are they coming against the nation of Israel, but they're coming against the God of Israel. And those that bless Israel will be blessed, and those who curse Israel will be cursed. That's a warning to the BBC. So thank you for watching this week's Politics Today.